someone working in learning and development for a long time, I've been tending to commit the same self-assuring mistake over and over again. I like to imagine that the training that I deliver is more impactful than it actually is. Does it happen to you? Excited about delivering a new training, you start fantasizing about how your participants are going to plan everything thoroughly, and then they're going to implement what they learn precisely, how they are going to deliver feedback that's both actionable and empathetic, how they're going to start implementing procedures like they never have before in their lives, and so forth. But once the hype is gone, it's very hard to prove what actually happens as a result of training. And I won't even go now into Kirkpatrick and measuring the effectiveness of training. I think we can all agree that we can commiserate on that. It's tough. But what I do want to talk about today has an essential connection to Kirkpatrick's third level of evaluation, that is the behavior of people as a consequence of the training that they participated in. Or in other words, the transfer of training or of learning into practice. Have you ever taken part in, for example, a time management training where you said to yourself and you're totally convinced, now I will finally get my shit together for good and I will put my life together and plan it like never before. Only to find yourself in the following week at work, in the office, full of emails, deadlines, meetings, changing priorities, a bit like this guy over here. So why does that happen? We know what we know what we need to do, and yet somewhere there's a disconnect. So what actually helps us transfer the learning into practice? Now, researchers have been looking for answers to this question for decades. They looked at things like how relevant the training was. They asked how much the organizations really support their employees in applying training. Do they have enough resources? Do they have relevant job description? Do they have supportive colleagues and managers? And finally, they looked at different aspects of the individual, such as, are people really capable and willing to apply learning into practice? For example, do they have things like self-efficacy, that is the belief that I can do the things that I'm supposed to do? Do they have an openness to experience, or are they resistant to novelty? Do they associate work with positive emotion? And not only that, but do they have a career plan? Are they dedicated to the organization that they're part of and motivated to put that career plan into practice, and so on? So by now you might have been nodding a lot, and you're right. All of these things correlate strongly with the quality of learning transfer. But I'm now here to tell you that there is one big piece of the puzzle that we don't talk about enough. What could that be? Let's take a step back to that moment of overwhelm from earlier. So that's when you realize you're not really applying what you learned. And in that point, maybe instead of a lack of knowledge or skill, which you already have, it could be an issue of poor inhibition. For example, there are so many distractors and you just can't help allowing yourself to be distracted and running around after all of them. Or it could be an issue of emotional self-regulation. You can't shake off the feeling of panic and concern, and that prevents you from seeing things clearly. Or it could be a problem of working memory. You just can't remember what you were going to do before all of those distractors appeared. So all of these things, together with many others, are all different facets of what we call executive function. Yeah, so I'd like to introduce this notion of executive function that I think is really relevant to the transfer of learning. So what is executive function? We could define it as a neuropsychological capability that enables self-regulation. Let's say that again, because it may sound a bit technical, right? A neuropsychological capability means that it's a default ability that our brain develops slowly over time while it's maturing. And it takes a long time. So if you're under 30 years of age, you might still be developing your executive function. And this is the capability that lets us regulate ourselves. And that more precisely means that when we have executive function, we can act upon ourselves, we can do things to ourselves in order to change the things that we do, to change our behavior, with the purpose of influencing a consequence that is further out into the future. Yeah? So I act with a distant goal in mind, and I'm able to alter my own internal state in order to change my behavior so that I manage to achieve my goal. So that's why the degree to which you possess executive function is going to determine how successful you will be at achieving your long-term goals. And yes, as you probably suspect by now, there is a pretty wide variation in executive functioning from one person to the other. So here you can see an imaginary example of 3 different people and how they might look on this map of executive functioning. You don't need to have things like ADHD or autism or other forms of neurodivergence for your executive function to lapse sometimes. If you've ever put salt in your coffee or blurted out something you regretted or failed to plan for something important, maybe left your keys in your fridge, then you know what I mean. But wait, you might ask, didn't you say that this was a neuropsychological capability? Right? So how can we change something that is so intimately linked to our brain's development and so strongly determined genetically? And that's true. Executive function is largely a given, but there are workarounds. So here's a sneak preview. We know so far that executive function is the most advanced function of the human brain, and that's why it takes the longest to develop. Every time we exert it, we need to use a bit of our willpower. And willpower means energy consumption. So treat it like a finite resource. Maybe you've been gifted with an advanced power engine of executive functioning, and you can be super fast and efficient. Lucky you. Or maybe, like most people, your executive function is imperfect, and you need to make up for it here and there. In either case, like with any finite resource, you have 2 main options. You can either increase or save your energy. Now, what does it mean in this case? Increasing your energy means giving your brain what it needs so that it has enough energy so that you can maintain a high level of willpower, that we all know things like healthy food, hydration, enough sleep, physical movement, and protection from stress. And when it comes to saving, in this case, we need to externalize. So we don't put so much demand on ourselves. We externalize our executive function as much as possible through delegating the things that we can delegate, writing notes instead of trying to remember everything, having calendar entries, alarms, physical time trackers, and sometimes even the help of kind people around us who are willing to keep us accountable and call us out when we don't stick to our plan. So this is just the beginning of some concrete actions that we can take to do some executive function maxing for the win, or better said, for a better learning transfer. Thank you.